People want to buy stuff that they see other people like them are buying and it's being successful. I always was tried to be a very straightforward leader and a very open leader. In fact, there are times when I've been...
I always say to people, I think I'd probably say 80% of people sell badly. It still feels to me that most salespeople traditionally go into pitch mode rather than listen mode, in my experience, and it's one of the biggest mistakes I've seen with them. But what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is it. I mean, we all...
Welcome back to this week's podcast, and it's always good to have you guys with me on the podcast to share insights and ideas as ever to help you grow your business, especially from an IT perspective. And I'm absolutely really chuffed to bits that I've got a fantastic guest with me today, a man that has had a long career in the IT industry, including sort of nearly 20 or to over 10 years as a CEO of a publicly listed company, and over 8 years, I should say. He'll give you his full bio in a moment, but also then working with another very large MSP, let's call it MSP, so IT services business. We'll go through that in a moment. But a man that's achieved a huge amount in his career, and very great to welcome onto the podcast, David Brooks. Nice to have you, David.
Thanks, James. Good to see you. Thanks for inviting me on.
Look, I've done a bit of an introduction of you, but for those that didn't know you and your background, obviously give everyone just a bit of a potted history of you went through the ranks at RM from
Yes.
number of roles over like a 20 odd 25 year period to rise into CEO in the end. Tell everyone a little bit more about that journey.
Yeah, no, I mean, I did a computing degree at Brighton Polytechnic back in the day, came out in the early 90s. There weren't really any jobs around, and I really liked Brighton, so I was just looking to stay down there. My mum sent me a number of different letters that said, before email, letters saying, you need to go and get yourself a job, young man, sort of thing. And she sent me a advert out of a national newspaper for RM were employing people. And I said, well, I don't want to do that. But she said, well, she's quite canny. She said, well, why don't you go and do it as practice, practice for interviewing and things like that. Anyway, long story, got the job, joined RM on the technical support line, answering questions mainly from schools and colleges about their technical problems, and I stayed at RM for a long time. I did technical jobs for a while, then I moved into sales. I had a boss that made me go to the dark side, which was what we called it at the time, going over to the sales side. Absolutely. And found it was the most difficult job I'd ever done. Did sales for a number of years, sort of went back into operations, general management, and then I helped run RM's IT services business. Then I ran RM's SaaS business for a number of years before I became chief executive. And I did that, chief executive for 8 years. And it was started off as a turnaround. And when we got it growing, both in the UK and internationally, we did some M&A, we did some organic growth, and left there when I got 50. When you're the graduate that turns to chief executive, you're Mr. RM, and I didn't want to be Mr. RM anymore. And I joined a private equity backed, as you say, IT services business called Charterhouse, and spent 4 years there. Sort of again a bit of a turnaround, and then getting it growing back again organically. So yeah, and since then I've come out of executive life, and now I spend most of my time working with CEOs in UK-backed technology SMEs as a sounding board, a strategic advisor to help them navigate growth, their scaling, and any leadership challenges they have.
Amazing. So look, we're going to delve a lot into your career and the things you've done and what you've done over that period of time, because we met at an event, and I always, as you may remember, I remember thinking this guy knows his onions. I asked a question into the audience, and you were the first one that came back. I was like, this guy knows his stuff. But talk to me a little bit about you mentioned about your mum. Sent you that job description. I mean, was she? Because obviously, one of the first things I do ask, business leaders and experts is where, who were their initial inspiration, stroke mentor?
Well, there's definitely a bit of just wanted a job, but she was definitely the most driven of my two parents. She was a head teacher in a state school. We used to call her macho mum, which probably you're not allowed to say those things anymore, but that's what we called her, because she was incredibly driven. And she was the person, when you came back from school and said, I came second in the maths test, first thing she would look at you and say, who came first? So she was definitely someone. I'm a very competitive person. I think I get it from my mum, and she didn't understand the business world necessarily, but she knew that in order to be successful, you need to really work hard, and you needed to be, competitive and look for the next opportunity all the time.
And I think we don't digress, and we're not going to make focus on your mum, but that sort of background, I'm the same. My mum and dad were very much driven, driving me to always to do my best, but to succeed and to achieve and to work hard. I mean, I say to people, I started my first job when I was 11, and that sort of ethic that's not a bad thing, right? To have that element of, there's a lot of people that talk about if you work harder than anyone else, you've got a bigger chance than anyone else.
I agree with that. I mean, I think I've got 3 kids, and the two things I try to work with my kids on is one, have a good friendship group, so really be judged by your friends, and two is have some form of work ethic. And I do think I feel much happier when I see my kids with friends, but also when they say, they've all got part-time jobs, etc. And I really like that work ethic, because I think I've certainly in my career always felt that I've worked pretty hard. I've liked doing stuff outside work. I'm not a workaholic to the point where I impact lots of weekends and things. I do a whole bunch of stuff outside work. But when I'm at work, I've really enjoyed work, and I really feel strongly that you need to work hard in order to get the results you want.
Yeah, sure. Totally agree. So talk to me about, these days at, the front line support desk, which is obviously one of the things that people talk about is when you're a CEO and leader, people say, oh, well, they've never, been in my shoes. They've never done the tough jobs. They've never had to answer the difficult calls from customers and all those sort of things. I mean, obviously you'd done a technical degree, but was that open your eyes? Tell me about those first experiences of actually engaging with customers and how did
I mean, it was a real open of eyes. I mean, the thing about technology, as we all know, is such a broad area, and suddenly, even though I'd done a computing degree, I knew nothing about PCs and networking and application software that sat on top. I didn't really know, so it was a real learning curve. They purposely put you on the hotline pretty quickly, and you were in pods of 4 of you sitting around the same desks, and basically you'd have to put people on hold a lot and say, Jeff, Hazel, what is this sort of thing? So you had to learn that way, and literally it was the days when you pretty much had to ask to go to the loo type thing. So you were on the phone. You got in the morning, you had a loo break and a lunch break, but pretty much you had to be full-time in the office. Obviously, there was no working from home in those days. And you just learned a massive amount. And the big thing I learned, there was a guy that was just coming up to retirement called Jeff. And the big thing I learned from him was his approach and attitude to customers was excellent. So he was not very technical. In fact, he didn't know much about IT. But because he treated his customers really well, really calmly, really respected them and always got back to them and did find solutions for them. Some of them he understood, some of them he didn't. But and that whole customer service side of things, he's really calm, collected. And I learned a lot from sitting next to him for 18 months. And I think that's one of the things that, again, with work, you just learn so much from spending time with people who know their onions.
Couldn't agree more. And it's that aspect, like you say, of someone that I remember, working in my early days in 3Com and Allied, even before that, working with people that really cared. And I always remember one guy, telling me that, when you get back to someone, you get back to them. And I learned, there was a great quote I learned from Marilyn Monroe afterwards. I didn't learn from the time, but they said, she said, promises are worse than hope because you give people. No, so promises are worse than lies because you give people hope as well as expectation. I think something like that. And that aspect of communication and making sure that, because most of the time customers can deal with bad news. What they can't do is not being communicated with, isn't it? And was that something that sort of became really integral to as you went through the sort of, the ranks of RM and other companies? Was that communication big for you as a sort of an element for engaging with customers and other?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, I would say, one of my skill sets is being a good communicator. I've learned to listen a lot more than I used to do. But I've always felt that communication is something that is a real strength to me, and I really enjoy engaging with other people. And when I became chief executive, coming back to the sort of frontline staff, I made a commitment, probably quite naively at the time, to go and see a customer every single week. So every week I would go and see, and we mostly sold to schools, local government and central government. And so I would go and see a customer every week, and I would blog about it every week. And that meant for me, I really leaned into that. I learned a massive amount. I really enjoyed it. Sometimes it was a bit of a ball ache because you really did have to do it. But it also set the tone with the organisation, which is, don't go and talk to David about customer stuff unless you really know what you're talking about, because this guy is still talking to customers every single week. So it was for me, I really enjoyed it. So it was an easy thing to do in lots of ways, but it was a very powerful message to the organisation.
I love the fact that you did that, and the fact that, especially when RM was a FTSE listed company, was a listed business. You had huge amounts of expectation on you from the markets, from shareholders, from lots of different people and lots of different sides. But the fact that you made it your goal to actually go and visit a customer every week, and I'm guessing but I'm guessing in the main you kept that, and I guess what it also did is, I guess it kept you close to the coalface, right, to really find out what was going on from a client perspective.
Yeah, and it was so helpful because you go into all these internal meetings and someone comes with a proposal about, we should do this to the product, we should do this to the service, etc. Well, I just had a great set of people, connections, that either I could ask the nearest person I met that week, or I'd met hundreds of these people over a period of time, and some of them, you meet some people and you never meet them again, and some people you keep in contact. So I had a set of head teachers in particular who I could just drop an email to, said, we're thinking of doing this, what do you think about it? And they'd come back and say either that's the worst work idea in the world, or yeah, that sounds brilliant, when can we have it, sort of thing. So I found that very, very useful.
I think there's more chief executives that need to do that, and I think the ones that I work with and you work with now, I'm sure, is keeping your ear to the ground. And it's difficult because everyone gets told you've got to work on the business, not in the business. But actually, it's very difficult to work on the business if you don't understand the dynamics that go on day to day. Like you say, what's happening in the market trends, what's going on, what are the pressures you're facing, what are the challenges. And I think we'll talk about sales in a moment, but it's one of the things that I think great sales teams are very good at doing is they're great market researchers and educators, and they're great at being able to feed back information into the organisation. And without that, you're a bit blind.
Well, no, and the knock-on effect I found from going to see a customer each week was usually I would either go with a salesperson, or I would go with a service delivery manager or someone that was doing the support and services for them. And of course, you have the pre-meet and you have the post-meet as well. So I was able to talk to frontline salespeople, frontline support people all the time about, so what are your other customers saying? What do you think? And and them saying, do you know what, our expense system is absolute nightmare. Let me show you. And it's those kinds of things that the knock-on effect of going to see customers was that I spent a lot of time with frontline staff as well. And sometimes you don't want to hear it. I mean, bluntly, you go, oh, I know, and because you haven't got an easy solution. But it is a really good way of staying much closer to what's happening in the organisation.
Yeah, sure. Look, you mentioned that, when we came in, you had someone, a boss that moved you into sales. Tell everyone a bit more about that, because you've told me a bit about it. But obviously you were in this technical role, but then someone, David, you're coming into sales and you're going to learn. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it pretty much was as simple as on a Friday afternoon. This was a guy who in the end went on to be chief executive of RM, a guy called Tim Pearson, a real mentor and inspiration for me. He basically came and saw me on a Friday afternoon and said, look, I've spoken to he ran a lot of the technical teams, and he said, I've spoken to the head of sales. We both think you've got a chance to be in sales, so you're starting in sales on Monday. And I was like, Tim, I'm not. There's no way I'm going to the dark side. You could see everyone around me going, well, if you go over there, we're not talking to you again, Brooks. You forget it, sort of thing. And he said, no, it's not. We're not debating it, David. You need to go and work in sales. And so I was thrown into it. Thinking that, well, I'll all I need to do, it'd be really easy. All these salespeople, they don't do very much. They talk a lot, but they don't do very much. And of course, then you're 3 months in, you're nowhere near your quota. Your customers want a whole bunch of things that you don't provide, and everything you provide, they don't want. You're trying to build a relationship with them, and you're everything's in your car, so you're living in your car all the time, sort of thing. And it was just a very interesting and very good process. I wouldn't have become a chief executive if I hadn't had to go and sell earlier in my career, because you just have to find out another way of doing things. And everyone sells differently, but you have to find out how you sell as an individual.
It's such a good point in terms of being able to sort of work those elements out. Was there any? Did they? Obviously you were starting on a Monday. Did they give you any sort of blueprint? Any elements?
They were very good. They gave a lot of training actually, and so they, the whole how to ask the right questions, how you close a deal, all of that stuff, and it was quite systematic. You need a pipeline. You need to forecast accurately. If you're not forecasting accurately, you're not doing your job. So there was definitely a machine. I was very lucky there was a machine there, and once you'd got your feet a bit on the table, there were a whole bunch of other salespeople. They're very competitive, but they're also people that like to be liked, and therefore if you build a relationship with other salespeople, I would just spend my whole time saying, how do you do this bit and how do you do that bit? But there was a lot I was lucky, we're an organisation of a certain size, there was a lot of formal training. One of the things that I did quite early on was they did a bunch of role playing where you had to go, you sort of sat in front of other salespeople, and the sales director would say, I'm a customer, and they would role play what you were being asked. And the sales director was very good at being a really difficult customer, and you could look like an idiot in front of all your colleagues, but my goodness, you learned very, very quickly. And you saw how the really good salespeople did it, and you were like, oh, okay. So you could see what good looked like, which for me was I found very useful.
It's funny you mentioned it, Rob. I do. People sometimes call it simulation or role play. I think role play is the most important thing you can do in a sales environment, and people hate it because they hate doing it in front of their colleagues. But as I say to them, there's no better place to do that sort of stuff than when you're in a safe environment, pretty safe compared. There's always a bit of competition, but you're going to then learn and practice. And practice ultimately in sales is going to be a key factor to getting success. But just to go back to your sales career, then. So you're in this sort of sales environment. Sales is one of those things that, especially if you look at now, sort of the technology space. One of the things that I learned, again, key mentors for me were people that sold not on the technology but on the benefits and the outcomes. But yeah, it feels like sometimes a lot of technical salespeople still. I don't know if it was like when you were in Charles House as well, and the teams you've had. There's still this obsession sometimes with selling tech, isn't it? Without necessarily selling the outcomes and the impact that it gives for people. And is that one of the sort of challenges you've seen or not challenges that businesses have in terms of in the technical space? They're still too focused on features and functions rather than benefits and outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is still a lot of that. I mean, what I've found is most of the time through my original sales career, and then when I was running sales teams, and then I was chief executive of other things, was we were often selling to technical people, and therefore when you're selling to technical people, both sides of the partnership like to talk in that technical way. The best salespeople I found were able to sell to technical people, so they could talk techie, but were able to equip those technical people to be able to sell internally to their stakeholders, whether that was a CFO, a CEO, whoever, business people, and they found the way of saying, right, so we're going to talk about all the bytes and whatever and what this functionality does, but actually for your stakeholders, they're going to be talking about, well, how is this going to improve the issue that we've got over here, and what's the business challenge that it's focusing on. And the really good salespeople are able to have the techie bit, but also be able to equip the techie people to internally go and help sell, and also they would feel comfortable in going to talk to the stakeholders. The classic thing is, well, this is what I think you're talking to stakeholders. I don't think I can. Well, why don't I come with you? I'll come and see you. Or, in my case at RM, it was often head teacher or bursar or whatever. Let's come and sit, and I'll sit down with them. Let's go through them. And at that point, they don't understand anything about the technology. So it is all around, this is the business problem we're solving. And also a lot of it, particularly with services, is this is why you can trust us to be able to deliver on these promises that we're making, because there aren't the kind of features and things. It's just like, you provide the service, this is why you can trust us.
Yeah, and you're right. It's having that ability to be a bit of a chameleon sometimes, isn't it, in certain situations, and to adapt your. I say this to a lot of salespeople. If you're talking to a CFO versus a CTO, then actually you've got to be able to understand the CFO is going to ask questions around payback and results, and you've got to understand that business case scenario. But you've also then got to be able to understand the CTO is going to be thinking about technology futures and whatever else as a result of it. So again, some of the great best salespeople I learned from in 3Com have that ability to coordinate and engage with both, which is a real skill and real.
It is a real skill, and the best of them are brilliant questioners. They work out if you sit in with a CFO, however dogmatic they look, however, if you just ask them a few questions, if you get someone talking about themselves and their own issues, it immediately opens up the conversation, and suddenly you've got a CFO that's telling you all the things that are important to them right now, and you're able to then link some of that to some of the stuff you do. And I think that whole ability to be able to question people in a really good way that allows them to talk and open up is one of the biggest skills that I learnt as a salesperson. Interestingly, in the work I do now, where I'm talking a lot to chief executives, I'm spending my whole time needing to ask them good questions to get them to open up, and I learned most of that from my sales experience.
It's incredible you say that, and it's so true. And it feels to me, and it'd be interesting your view on this. If I always say to people, I think I'd probably say 80% of people sell badly. It still feels to me that most salespeople, sadly, even in IT, and obviously we're in an IT environment, both of us, traditionally go into pitch mode rather than listen mode, in my experience, and it's one of the biggest mistakes I've seen with them. But what about you? Mistakes you've seen from working with technical and salespeople and business owners. Would that resonate with you?
Yeah, I think that is it. Anyone that's been in sales hates being sold to like that, and I do see, you start off with the deck that says this is why we're brilliant. Right, and any sales deck that starts with this is why we're brilliant, any senior person just I'm not listening to any of that, because everybody says that this is why we're brilliant, and it starts with that pitch. Whereas the really good sales processes get to the bottom of what is your business issue and can we help. One of the things that I found very powerful when I was doing big ticket sales, where you would go in and talk to organizations about implementing, an 8-year program of implementing software and then managed services, etc., is you would be quite open with we might not be the right people for you. Well, let's get to the bottom of what your problem is. I've got a bunch of things I can do, but I'm also going, and that immediately, even if you don't bloody mean it, that immediately gets into, oh right, okay, well I thought you'd come and sell something. No, we've got some great stuff. Don't, but let's get to the bottom of where your issue is, and if I can't help you, then I probably know someone that people can help you. And all of that initial engagement really helps. And you're right, the bit that gets people find that they just turn off is, look, we're brilliant, here's the pitch, our product does this, the services, and anybody that uses the word world class in the first 5 minutes of speaking to you, the switches go off. You're like, well, boom, and so I think that there's still that danger of trying to pitch something when you really don't understand what the business problem is.
And it's funny you mention it, and we're going to talk about more about your career. But I guess when you were a CEO for a long time of a big company, and one of the big worries that a lot of salespeople have is pitching at CEOs. Right? They worry about it. They think you're some sort of demigod that you can't talk to, and that and I always used to say,
we are. What are you talking about? Yeah.
Well, exactly, but I always used to, and I always say to salespeople all the time, your job in sales is to think, and I say to them, imagine, for those listening, you can't see, but I imagine literally that person on their desk today, rubbing their eyes, going, "That's a problem today." I said, your job is to work out what those issues are, what those things are that are making that CEO go, "Oh God, what an issue we've got today," and that's the same issue we've got time and time again. And then be in a position where you come in and try and help them solve that issue, right? Because ultimately, the best thing about selling to C-suites, and especially to CEOs, is those guys just go, well, if you can show me you can fix it and you make it happen, well, I'll make the money available to invest in it. But it's very... Was that the case when you were CEO? Did you get approached much, actually, in terms of by salespeople?
Yeah, got approached all the time. And the first thing I would say is I would not engage with anybody that approached me directly. unless they were recommended by someone. So whether that could be an external person that's recommended them or an internal colleague. So if they, someone in my team said, oh, I've got this person who wants to come and talk to us about things, then that's fine. But they wouldn't get in the room and I wouldn't engage with them, however good their problem solving was, unless I had some form of personal recommendation somewhere. That gets you in the room. And then once you're in the room, as you say, it's about understanding what the issue is. And often you can find that out by good questioning, but you also need a hook to start with, and you need whoever's got you in the room to be providing you information about, what do you think David's point is? Because the other thing is you're so busy, you've got so many things on that you just want people to get to the point. So you don't want any faff around it. It has to be, I've come here to see you because so-and-so's introduced me for this reason. I think we can help. Can I just start off by asking you a couple of questions or something? And it's that, but you need to be, here's the agenda. Here's the agenda. This is why I'm here. This is what I'm doing. I'm not your mate. I'm here to do that. And I might become your mate in time, but I'm not your mate. But can I just ask you a couple of questions? And for me, as a chief executive, it's like, right, we've got to the point originally. That's good. That's what I thought the meeting was about. That's fine. Yeah. What do you want to know? Yeah. What do you want to know? Boom. And that would be my suggestion when you're selling to CEOs.
Great feedback and great insight there in terms of being able to get through the door. And actually, interesting enough, we talked a couple of times there about the idea of a champion or an internal person. I guess it links into sort of sales methodologies like MedPick, which are really good sort of ways in which to have that entry point in on that champion. I've done a couple of videos around sort of those elements. But just going back to, before we get into the CEO part, I want to talk about the sales momentum you had. And two things. RM, when I knew RM, one of the benefits, I always remember RM having just focused on education. Education was the sweet spot. Do you think that was a blessing or a curse to RM? Because in many cases now, I look at a lot of organisations and I say, pick your market. If you do everything to everyone, not something to someone. But obviously it was, a challenge in some cases, I guess, because if people, in government times and spending was less, it was an issue. But what's your sort of view on that? Because and how important is picking a niche especially for service providers, even like when you're in Charterhouse? And
I think a niche is really important, particularly for IT services businesses. I think for businesses generally, I do think you've got to focus and work out what you want and what you want your customer to be. In RM overall, I think was a real positive, and I'll explain that. One is because, and we did dabble with other sectors at certain points and other adjacent markets, but never really got it right. So it was really good from a customer point of view in that you could go and see a customer and you could present yourself as an expert in their area and you could talk their language and their jargon, whether that was talking to teachers or head teachers or local government, local authority people or central government. You were talking in their language about what they were, and particularly in education, you need to get that language right because they're very suspicious of commercial organisations, and if you don't have that language correct, that's a problem. Second thing is you do get a set of people working for you that often like the sector and get to know the sector very well, and that's a very powerful thing. And then thirdly, when you put things together and you're doing it, you're able to focus on the business problem in a lot of detail and a lot of depth. And often that really is the difference between you winning an IT services contract and not winning, because you really are able to get to the depth of what's the business problem, what we're trying to sort, and how do we as an organisation work with that. So I think it was a positive thing with RM. I mean, the downside we had as a listed company was it was very government funding, very reliant. Sorry, that's the word, on government funding. And when government funding was great, as it was in the 90s and the 2000s for education, Blair, education, woohoo! And then the coalition government came in 2010, and they decided tech in schools wasn't very good, and they weren't going to think like that. And that really meant that we were, scrabbling around for growth. We had to go internationally more. We had to go into other parts of education. So you need to recognise that if you put all your eggs in one basket, and there are sort of factors that change that. But overall, I really leaned into that when I became chief executive, and I said, look, we're an education business. We just sell to education, and we want to. That was part of the going to see a customer every week. We want to get to know the education sector better than anybody else.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And one of the things I talk to a lot of business people about is in customers that I work with is, this phrase of inch wide, mile deep is a phrase that Adrian Morehouse used to. I think he coined it around Rackspace in Europe, and know your customer base and solve focused problems for them, and I think it's a really good essence to do that. Just lots of I'm conscious of diversity across lots. You've got so many things that you've got done in your career and things that you've had that you've achieved, and it's interesting to talk through these things. When you were obviously growing and you got into your senior roles in RM, and you were obviously before you got to CEO, did that give you an inclination into, because obviously you weren't just in the sales team then, you were running different divisions and different areas of the business. How critical to sort of the operational running, you obviously were speaking to very senior people then. How important was like the sales engine at that point to the business, and what did you change much when you sort of came into the role to sort of finesse that a bit more? Talk to me, because I think a lot of people, the reason I ask the question is because a lot of people, I say to people, senior business companies, and I learned this from working for a NASDAQ company, your sales and your forecast and your engine is everything. If you don't have that certainty and that clarity on what you're doing, you're pretty much going to get beaten out of town. So,
yeah, I probably took it for granted at RM, because I think for years and years the sales engine had been set up and was very good, and we had very much a blueprint. We had to change some of it when we were looking internationally. We had to change some of it when we worked with partners, not just going directly to the business. But that whole cadence of building your pipeline, forecasting accurately, looking at how you qualify leads and then close them down, etc. There were some good metrics, and it was really good in RM. I think the thing I've learned probably from founders more than anything else is that it is the lifeblood of an organization, and you know that because when you've got a founder of a technology business, they either do it themselves, so they are the lead salesperson in that organization and they prioritize things, or they hook up with someone else that does sales and they keep that person for an extended period of time and they work with that person. And so most of the things, and the reason I say that is because often founders instinctively know what's right for their business or what, because they have to feel it and touch it, and it's things like, and they know that sales is important, so they either do it themselves or they find someone and who really gets it, and they go with that person and they support that person. So I did know it was important. I probably took it for granted, if I'm honest, at RM, because it was a good machine that we built for a number of years, and we didn't, and so I didn't have to rebuild a machine at RM. In Charterhouse, it was my second thing. I had to bring in a new sales director, and we had to change a lot of what we were doing. And again, if I had my time again, I would have been more niche than we turned out to be at Charterhouse. We tried to sell too broadly at times, mainly because we were chasing any form of revenue growth. The business hadn't grown for a long time. It was 6 acquisitions that put together, but it hadn't organically grown for a period of time, and we were looking for any business possible, any revenue possible, because we were looking to sell it, and we just needed to have some organic growth. On reflection, that meant we were asking too much of our salespeople, and we weren't focusing on a few verticals that would have actually made a difference. Now, interestingly, when we did start to grow, it was in verticals that the salespeople got used to, and it wasn't a strategy that we did. It was more the salespeople saying, "Well, actually, Stadia are a good place to go. We really think that we're working well with that. The NHS is we've got," and so we did do it, but it wasn't strategically. I didn't learn my lesson, really.
It's interesting you mention it, and again, something I always say to sales teams is that people always think they've got to have a strategic driven. And I always say to salespeople, you don't need that. Actually, look at where your success has come. If you've done work in an NHS organisation, then go and find 3 or 4 others locally and say, I solved that problem for these guys. Can I help you solve the same problem? Because I always say POs follow pain, and so go and find where the pain is in that environment, and then suddenly you've got 3 or 4, and then like you say, it becomes maybe there's lots of other organisations around the country that've got this.
No, and instinctively good salespeople get that and know that, because good salespeople want their life to be as simple as possible. So they'll go to the customers that they know are most likely to listen to what they think. And particularly in services, having that track record and that credibility of a customer that looks like the customer that you're selling to is so important. And NHS is a classic example of, you just say to them, we've done this elsewhere, ring them and ask them. And they're like, yeah, well, we will. We'll ring you. We'll talk to you once we spoke to them. And of course, hopefully you've primed the person. But even if you haven't, that's what you've got to be able to do. You've got to deliver a good service so that when that phone call comes in, I'm talking to Charterhouse, you go, oh yeah, they've done a really good job for us. Right, okay, we will talk to you. And so, yeah, that people want to buy stuff that they see other people like them are buying and it's being successful.
Which is in exactly the same way as what we talked about when you were CEO and people got in there and you got in the room. If they'd actually knew other people who had that referral link in there, it's the same conversation, right? People know, like, and trust. And one of the things that I say to a lot of IT organisations is they don't spend enough time building that Google Zero Moments of Truth, 7-11-4, 7 hours of content across 4 different media, across 11 different interactions. People need that time to trust you to then go, do you know what, they're consistent all the way through. I quite like these guys, quite like what they stand for. They fix that, okay, let's have a conversation. And it's that part that's where I always think sales and marketing are interlined. If you don't have especially in a modern environment now, if you don't have that marketing engine that talks about those elements alongside the sales team, you're going to fail.
No, agreed. And the other thing is, in the world we live in, UK businesses actually quite like buying from other UK businesses where they can see that business and they know it's got a chief executive and so that they can meet and say hello to and whatever. We used to use that a lot in Charterhouse with our customers, is that there would be a senior member of the team, whether it was me or one of the other exec members, who would sponsor particular deals, and you would get to know the customers, and that really reassured the customer that they were dealing with someone senior, and that person was a real person and it wasn't just a big corporate, etc. And we really leaned into, we're only an SME, we're big enough so that we're not going to go bust tomorrow, and we can deliver it and we can show them, but you can also get to the top people if things aren't going right. And I think in a services environment in particular, people really value that.
Yeah, for sure, for 100%. Obviously, as you went through your career, you've obviously built lots of relationships and built lots of. How important was your leadership team for you? Because obviously, one of the things around MSPs and providers that I talk to at the moment is that, especially some of the smaller ones, and they've obviously got. It is quite reliant still on themselves, but actually, you obviously we were in some businesses that were very were growing and were strong. But how important was your leadership team in helping, especially in maybe the sales and marketing angle, to be able to put the structures and things in place that you wanted to, and to also know that, because as a CEO, your job is to cover so many different areas, right? It's you've got a myriad of 101 things on your to-do list. So, how important was your leadership team for you in both roles?
Yeah, I mean, it was incredibly important, and as an individual, I am quite a generalist. I mean, I get bored very quickly as well. So I do need people around me who are driving the business forward, and I can support and help them. In my first, one of the mistakes I made with RM is that I didn't engage and change my team early enough in the whole process, which meant I didn't have a set of people that were really driving the business. When I came into Charterhouse, I changed pretty much the whole team reasonably quickly, not because the people that were there were bad people or anything. I just knew I needed a set of people that could really drive the business forward, and that my role wasn't to do that personally. My role was to support and help the team and make sure they worked together and make sure as a team we were doing the right thing. So for me, I remember I did an interview with someone after I'd left RM, and they said, what's the one piece of advice you give as a chief executive? And I said, well, it's difficult, one piece of advice, but if it is one piece of advice, get your team right. If you get your team right, for my personality as well, everything follows. And don't misunderstand me, getting your team right is really difficult, because they might fight with each other, everyone changes their opinion on things. There are times when you have to do stuff for the business that doesn't help the individual in your team, and they're like, what? So it's a really difficult thing to get and keep and motivate a really good team in this over a longer period of time. But if you can get that right, you can do anything in a business, is my view.
And I think you're so right in what you said there. I guess one of the interesting things for me is also one of the reasons when I was in a larger organisation, the politics that go on in especially if you're a listed company like you guys, everyone's there's a lot of there's a lot of money and success and promotions and all those sort of things involved. How did you keep because I've seen plenty of organisations where it's like ferrets fighting in a sack, and it's very difficult to. So, was there any tips you'd give for how you kept? Because you need everyone to be competitive and to push and to drive forward and to be the best they can be in their area, but you also need that cohesion to bring them together as one unit. Was there any tips you used to use on doing that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things to unpack there. I mean, fundamentally, every organisation has politics. Yeah, good and bad politics. It's just inevitable. You have a group of 5 people all get together. There's some politics in there in some way, shape, or form. As organisations get bigger, then there is always a liability so there can always be more politics, etc. I mean, I always was tried to be a very straightforward leader and a very open leader. In fact, there are times when I've been probably more open than my board of directors or my PE backers would want me to be about things. But I've found if you treat people as adults and you're really open with them, then the majority of people treat you the same way, and you do cut through some of that politics. I think communication is absolutely key on all of it. Internal communication, talking to people, making sure that your top team are really clear of what the priorities are. So, I did set, and not everyone will do it, but we did set a vision and a mission and a set of values in both the organisations I ran, and I found that very useful. We did set objectives for the year that we reviewed that were very clear in the sort of customer and the financial and the employee point of view. So you kind of doing that. But for me, it was get the right top team and be really open and as honest as you can be, and to be pretty straight with people. And it doesn't stop politics, but I think it does help people realise that getting politics isn't going to get them up the organisation.
And it's funny, isn't it? Because we're talking this, we're recording this the day after England played in the World Cup yesterday evening, and one of the things I was listening to was that the England manager, this guy Thomas Tuchel, when he announced the squad, he phoned and one of the things that's talk about communication. He announced the squad by FaceTime. And I was listening to a podcast where he said that one of the players was told he wasn't going to go, even through a FaceTime call, which is probably most people can just say, "Oh, sorry, you're not going to get a text or do a normal call." And then they were like, "Why did he do that?" Because he wanted to see my reaction and he wanted to see my face and he wanted to see. And there's been a lot of talk that the England team, and again, I'm not going into football in this conversation now, has left out people that were seen as being a bit disruptive and a bit sort of not good for the team, element. And obviously they got early stages. They got a good result last night, but that's quite critical, isn't it? To be able to work out, have that straightforward element, but also be a bit. Not no nonsense, but a bit like, actually, we're not going to play games here. We're going to be straight and clear down the line on what we need to do and how we need to operate.
Agreed, and I think you need to call it out. The other thing is, if you've got to, as a senior team, there are times that you need to make some really tough decisions. You can't shy away from those tough decisions, and I think you need to be pretty open about making those tough decisions. I think you also need to share when things aren't going well as when they are going well. So, I will meet a lot of people, particularly chief executives, who just don't talk about when things aren't going well. They're always positive. Now, everybody on the ground floor knows at the coalface that something didn't work. A project was rubbish. And if you're sitting there going, well, it's what we're going to do, version 2 of something that's rubbish, everyone's going, oh yeah, whatever. If you say, do you know what, it was a complete nightmare, it didn't work, I put my hand up and say we shouldn't have sponsored that, you suddenly get a bunch of credit. Oh, right, this person's finally, how many leaders do we just want to go, do you know what, I messed up. We really messed that up. There's no excuse for it. I'm sorry. We're going to try and do things differently. But how many times do you get that and you go, oh, well, I'm actually going to listen to you because, etc. So I think that honesty, and I'm not saying you should dwell in the failures. I'm not saying you should always just talk about the bad things. But I do think you should be being honest and open with people when things don't go well, and then saying, and this is what we're thinking of doing in order to change that. That gets you a lot of credibility with people as a leader, I think.
I can agree more, and I think we're so obsessed in this country with failure being a bad thing, Whereas actually, if you look at America and a lot of our, their whole ethos and elements is around actually failure teaches you so many things, right? And the ability to, we're obsessed by everyone's decision. Every decision's got to be perfect. No, actually, you're going to make some mistakes. If you're going to, make 10, 15 different project investment decisions as a company. I mean, I remember talking to an American VC once that literally was going to buy my football club, and he was like, "I invest 100 million in 7 organisations." He said, "5 of them will fail. That's okay. 2 of them, and I'll lose money on those, but 2 of them will work, and I'll sell them for 500 million each, and I'll make 300 million at the end of it." And I was like, that was his ethos. He was like, "I'm going to make 300 million, but I know 5 are going to fail. I'm okay with that." And I was like, he was investing 100 million in each of these organisations. I was going, but that mindset, we don't sometimes have that so much in the UK, do we? People are looking for a scapegoat sometimes.
Yeah, they are. I mean, I think that what's interesting though is that if you hide from it, people don't believe you. So, there's a level of cynicism, which means they don't really believe it's all going well, it's all going great. I think, there is a flip side that sometimes we can be a little bit down on ourselves in the UK as well. So the thing about the States is that they often take more risks and they just get on with it and like, right, well, let's just push through it. Whereas we can sometimes wallow in, oh, isn't it terrible? Aren't we doing? But I do think that openness to show where things are failing and where they're not, that then drives people wanting to put their hand up and say, I'm not going to get in for trouble for saying this isn't working, which is what you want from from many of your employees. You don't want people just moaning that everything's not working. You want this isn't working and I suggest we do it in a different way. But you do want people putting their hands up to say this isn't working and not feel as though they can't do that.
Yeah, for sure. Look, we've talked for 45 minutes already, and we could talk for a long time. And there's a few things I want to ask you in terms of before we finish. I know your time's incredibly valuable. Question around growth now and scaling. Obviously, you work with a lot of MSPs and business owners, IT. And if you were to give, someone's listening to this that is, running a business, maybe they've turned over, I don't know, and typically, the ones, especially at some of they've turned over a couple of £1 million or £1 million, and they're growing, they've built this engine, they've got 5 to 10 people working for them, and they've sort of got the seed of something, but they're sort of maybe struggling to scale or grow that. What would sort of the top sort of bits of advice you would give as someone that's been in those, in those positions with other organisations to sort of helping them sort of get to that next level?
Yeah, I mean, our first thing I say is well done, because getting to that level is not straightforward, and there'll be a bunch of things that they're currently doing that they need to keep doing, and that will really help them. I think there is a difference between growing and scaling. I think that growing you can do by a small number of people all doing a lot of things and getting it and going, and you need to do that when you're a smaller organization. If you really want to scale, then you do need to think about what's your top team look like, what some of your processes are you going through it. I mean, I do think that sales is a science. It's not it is a science. It's not an art. Obviously, some people do it better than others and whatever, but fundamentally, the business of selling is there. There's lots of people that can help you and support you in that. I think your point about what is it that we're trying to solve for our customers, and is that still relevant, and can we see it as relevant? So the one thing about going from, let's say, a £2 million business to a £5 million business, as an example, over a period of time, is that you need a market that really can do that. And there's nothing worse than being in a market that's so small that you're fighting for every scrap. You do need something where what you're offering has got enough market headway so that it is possible to make those things. So yeah, it's what are you doing currently that's working really, really well? Double down on that. Look at your team and the capabilities of your team. You need to have a sales engine that does follow some basic principles around pipeline, forecasting, conversion rates, those sorts of things, where you just, what are the stages that someone, I worked with a founder recently and he was great at articulating, I didn't need to help him at all the different stages that a customer made decisions in order to buy their stuff. And he'd been running his business for 14 years and he'd written it all down, basically. And he said, this is what happens. These are the stages that they need to go through. And so as an organisation, internally, they talked about those stages and they said, well, which stage are we at? And all the reporting was, well, which stage are we at that? And it was their own language. It wasn't, it wasn't an external language, but they'd worked out what those stages are and they knew things. And I think that sort of approach really helps as you start to grow.
It's so important. It's the marginal gain theory, as I talk about it with people. It's that ability to go and work out, like you say, if I've got 5, 6 days in the process, whatever, what percentage do I get at each point, right? If I know I'm getting, 50 people in here and I only get, 25 to here, okay, so I'm losing 50% of them. Okay, what changes can I make, at that first stage to get that 25 to 28 or to 27?
Absolutely.
And then how many can I then get from the 28 to, and knowing those numbers and be able to be sure about those numbers and what's the what's the reason why we're struggling at that point, and what's the, it's why, I'm preaching the converted here, but what's that framework, what's the questions that are asked, what's the stage of the, how's the salesperson engaged, what have they done at that point? Because the one thing I see, again, working with a lot of MSPs and IT providers, is that there is a little bit of a. Funny enough, I was talking to one of my clients yesterday yesterday afternoon on about a lead that had come in, and they said this lead had come in, and it's a relatively decent sized lead. It's about 80, 90 users. They want the business because again, everyone's chasing and looking for growth. But it's like they've gone out to 6 companies. They're looking for the price option, and I said to them, "You really want that deal?" Because actually you're looking at it and going, it's one of those ones at the top. It's a lead at the top of the funnel. Is it really a lead? Is it really the level you want? They're looking at you, comparing you with 5 others. Realistically, they're just looking at price as an option to compare. Are you the right option? And actually the conversation was, maybe we're not actually. And I was like, now we're starting to see our positioning and that element of actually to be able to say thanks very much, but it's not for us. We focus on this area. We're really good at this. And I'd be interested in your view on that, because I don't think a lot of, certainly IT and MSP providers, are doing enough of that. Everyone's hunting and looking for every bit of deal rather than going step back and saying this isn't maybe a good fit for us.
I mean, it is a brave thing to qualify yourself out of that type of business that you think, well, we probably could win it, and why wouldn't we? And it's not. It's that is a judgment, and over time, sometimes you do just need some deals coming in, whether that's because you need the revenue, whether that's because you need the morale of a few wins because you haven't. So there are times you have to be pragmatic about it. But if you can, I mean, we used to have a thing that we put in place, particularly for our bigger deals that were, going to be quite material for us, which is, can we win it? Can we deliver it? Can we do it profitably? And every deal we would look through that lens, and that can you win it? You had to come up with the win strategy which differentiated you from the competition. Unless our strategy was on price, which usually it wasn't, then you couldn't use prices as the winning factor. We're going to give them a better price. You couldn't use that. So the sales teams had to come up with, this is our win strategy and this is the differentiation. And again, it can't just be as simple as, I know the guy and he likes me. Okay, so relationship is part of it, don't get me wrong, and that can be part of it. But if you couldn't articulate why you were going to win it against the competition, then sometimes we would say, we're not going for this deal. Now, often what happened is, once you went through that process, it meant that the sales team then were able to define that, then use that in their proposal, and then did win the deal. But can we win it? Can we deliver it? Can we do that profitably? Is something. It's an obviously straightforward matrix, but a methodology. But we found that very powerful, particularly for the more complex deals where we were either doing something new or it was quite a sizable deal.
And just to ask some a couple more questions before we finish. Conscious of especially in your time at RM, price. The education market specifically would always talk a lot about price.
Yes.
Price being a critical factor because, schools need books and all the stuff, the emotional stuff that we hear, that they can't spend it on anything else. But how did you guys overcome that so much in terms of, so obviously you had a great niche position, and I guess your pricing was probably, but you were the brand in that space. So you were probably always going to be a little bit more expensive than some smaller organisations. How did you overcome that? And what was your big advice for anyone that's got, that's faced in quite a price sensitive market?
Yeah, get out of it. No. I mean, we did a number of different things. We definitely positioned ourselves as the premium brand for a long time, and we're in the world of, we just can't do it for that price. If you are going to get it for that price, fine. But here's the 3 things that we think we're going to be delivering that you guys can't, or sorry, that competition can't in that way, and it's your choice to do that. That was something that we spent a long time working through, which was, how do we keep that premium brand and therefore we can charge a bit more. We did take a load of cost out. So as an example, with our services, we did our software development in India. We set up our own Indian office, and we did a lot of our back office network management and support through India, which had some pros and cons, but it did take, in a schools market where price was really competitive, it did take some cost out of there. So it's not one thing, it's a combination of things. I think if you're in a market where it's really price conscious and everyone delivers the same thing, then that's really tough. I mean, we came out of the hardware market in universities because the customer just did these online auctions, and it was all about bottom to the race to the bottom, and we just couldn't. You'd win some deals, but you'd be getting less than half a point of margin on it, sort of thing, and all it needed was one of the boxes to not be delivered to the right place, and you'd lost money on it, type thing. So I think where it's really easy to see that everyone's delivering the same thing, and it's very price competitive. But I think in services, there's always ways to differentiate. And the other thing we did do was that and it's a classic thing, is that you sell them the basic service with a bunch of things stripped out, and then you upsell over a period of time. And that's not always easy and straight. It's not always straightforward to do that, but it means it gives you an opportunity to get the trust with the customer and build that level of relationship, and then say, well, do you realise you get this, but we do have this as well. And of course, it's much easier to sell to existing customers who trust you. It's so much easier.
Yeah, for sure, 100%. And so look, I'm conscious of time. We've been going for, and I wanted just to a couple of things to finish off with in terms of any I wouldn't say final words or advice that you've got for obviously you're working with IT providers at the moment. We are in some sort of interesting economic times. Obviously the war the war stuff has hopefully changed that a little bit with the last couple of days. Any sort of top two or three other final tips from you on sort of before we get back to it, I'm interested in one thing that you mentioned about as a CEO, you had your downtime, because one of the challenges when you're in business is you're consumed by your business a lot, and actually how did you manage to make that especially when you're a CEO of a big company, there's this always on mentality that's supposed to be expected of you, but you realised obviously you needed that time apart from that. How did you manage to juggle that? And I'm just intrigued by did you have set rules that said, right, I'm not replying to emails after X time, or was it?
Yeah, I mean, I developed over time. I mean, fundamentally, I love sport and I love playing sport. And so I was, when I took over as RM, I was still playing first team hockey and all that sort of thing on Saturdays. And I had to train twice a week often, things like that. So there were things that I had to do if I wanted to carry on that. And it was almost non-negotiable. So I'm still going to play hockey type thing. I had 3 kids, which, between my wife and I, there's a lot of time and effort in bringing up 3 kids, and they don't care you're a chief executive. So you get home and it's just like, right. And particularly as I was working long hours, my wife works for herself. Often she was like, right, they're yours, get on with it. I'm not thinking, so I can't even answer emails. I'm not an evening person, so I don't like looking at things in the evening. So that helped. And people got used to the fact they wanted me. It was an early morning thing. I mean, there's no silver bullet. The thing I would say is when you run a business, you are thinking about it pretty much 24/7, 7 days a week. Even if you're not actively engaging with the business, when you're doing your teeth in the morning and last thing at night, you often are thinking about it. So distraction of kids, distraction of other things is important, just because that's something else to worry about that isn't work. But during the intense times, which you often do have as a business leader, it is difficult to get that balance. But I would work slightly longer hours. I get in early and to work slightly longer hours during the week, so that my weekends were not always, but most of the time, my weekends were not work. My weekends were doing something else.
And I guess and which is great. I love the advice, by the way, and love the idea, like you say, on the hockey pitch, no one's gonna care whether you're a CEO or not. They just want to win, right? It's the battle on the pitch. So, but I guess also that point that you said earlier on, maybe the one lesson that people can take from this is if you are going to meet with someone senior whose time is very precious, be really clear about what it is. Like you say, what's the purpose of this? What's the outcome? Get to the point. Do it. I always say to people, when to some of the sales team I talk about when we're making calls, win 15-second battles. But when you're engaging in meetings with senior people, it's winning 5-minute battles, isn't it? It's like they're 5 minutes at a time, because you probably may only get 10, 15 of them, and if you don't get it through at the end of that, you're probably gone.
Exactly that. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
Look, and then final sort of thing for anyone, any final tips from you as I wish there's so many more questions I wanted to ask and go through, which I haven't had a chance. Maybe we'll get you onto the podcast in another few months to talk about a number of things around sales deals and systems and engines and stuff that you built. But any other final sort of thoughts from you, because we're in a, as I say, strange sort of time at the moment. Any final tips from you on how to, you're helping people to grow or to build or to achieve what they want to?
I mean, I think with the strange times we have, the two pieces of advice I would definitely do is that forget whether it's strange times or not. The closer you are to your customer, the more you understand what your customer issues are, the more likely you are to be able to provide them stuff that they're going to buy from you. And I know it sounds very trite, but it's still true in our world today. The closer you are, and as a chief executive or as a senior leader, there are lots of things you can be doing that isn't engaging with customers. That isn't good enough. You've got to keep going with customers, because they will tell you what they need in order for it to allow you to grow. So that would be my biggest thing. I think the other thing, we haven't mentioned it at all, but the whole AI side of things, which I know would be a completely different podcast. As one of the things I'm finding from working with tech founders is they are all over it themselves. They really understand. They can tell you how their business could be completely destroyed by AI if it took off, if their customers used it in a certain way, and they are already building agents using generative AI regularly in their own business and their own personal life to work out what this technology can do. And I do think it's that disruptive that if I was a chief executive of any technology business right now, I would personally be getting my head around that properly, because it's changing our market as we speak, and there's a lot of rubbish spoken about it and what it can do. Like, the only way you're going to find out is by using it yourself and working out how it can impact your business.
Love that, brilliant. I mean, look, I think it's a great idea, because we haven't focused on AI as such, and there's lots of other areas that I'd love to go into more detail with you on, but I'm conscious of sort of time now. So look, finally, where can people reach you, Dave? Where's the best obviously place? Because I guess obviously LinkedIn is maybe your where you're out visible a lot. But where's the best place if someone listening to this wants to reach you and have a conversation?
I mean, that's the best place. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm now posting regularly with LinkedIn. I've really engaged with that platform. So yeah, if people want to reach out at all, just message me on LinkedIn. I'd be great to connect to people.
Amazing. Look, you've so generous in sharing so much of your time and insights today. And as I say, so many things that I've got on my list I haven't even covered, but time ran out with it. But that's always the nature of these conversations, because we showcase so many different thoughts. But thank you so much for giving up your time to be on the podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here and to sharing your insights and your knowledge and so in doing that so generously. And so I know that it will be powerful. I'm pretty sure I'm going to need to invite you back on in a couple of months' time to talk about a number of other elements around building sales engines, but also around the AI stuff, because you're right, the world is. I was talking to someone the other day and they were saying that AI. It was a podcast I was listening to. We might have superhuman AI within 2 years that can basically be the intelligence of us all, and it's like, whoa. That's quite scary, isn't it? But also how businesses can make enough use of that to really grow and do what they want to do.
Yeah. All right. Lovely. Thanks, James. Thanks for inviting me on. It's been great.
Thank you, David. Really appreciate it. So that was David Brooks, who was the, as I say, CEO of both Charthouse and RM. Really great guy. Fantastic, sharing so much knowledge and insights on the podcast this week to help other businesses grow. So that's it for this week. Thank you, as ever, for listening to and watching. If you're watching online and on YouTube, thanks for listening to the podcast, and we'll see you next week for another episode. Take care.